I got some really good news for you today, and I'll kind of miss her putting me on a timer. I'll tell you up front, most preachers don't go here. And the reason why, and I understand now, after spending a week on this, I get it. I kind of had an idea where I was going until I got there. And then it was like, oh boy, you know, this is a little bit more detailed than really what I care to get into. Maybe it's a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, but I think it suffices to say we'll do okay. This is one of those Hey Jude moments, all right? The book of Jude is about apostasy and apostates in that day and in this day. What will it look like? And he identifies a problem in Jude with apostasy, and he goes on to give some examples. He says, I will put you then in remembrance of these things. Though you know them, I'm going to remind you of these things. And he gives these three examples. There's this disbelieving people that came out of Egypt that did not believe the report. And last week it was about slaying giants, or, you remember? Swatting grasshoppers. Yeah. You're going to do one of the two things. You're either going to face the giant and slay it, or you'll spend your moments swatting at grasshoppers. They came back. The mentality was all wrong except for two. We can do this. We can take this land. God's with us. It's everything he said it was. But then the 10 gave an evil report that no. It's all these things. There's giants in the land. That was true. Grapes are big. That was true. It's a land that flows with milk and honey. That was true. But we're like grasshoppers in their sight. That was not necessarily true. That was their spin. And so Caleb, he's ready to go. Joshua, he's ready to go. Can you imagine the patience of those two men? Because no generation would see the promised land from 20 years and up. So they wandered around 1 year for every day that they visited that land. So there's an example that's given to us that there's probably not anything that cripples a church. There's not anything that cripples a society. There's not anything that'll cripple your life like unbelief. You just don't believe. And at the root of most of our problems, it's we just really don't believe God. Not all. I don't know that God had much to do with me locking myself out of my truck. I did that all myself. I didn't need any help. But the fact of the matter is this. When you don't believe and you don't trust him at his word, what do you think is going to happen? So here we are in verse 6. And I would run from it, but I don't have anywhere to hide. Verse 6. Disobedient principalities. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto judgment of the great day. And everyone said, Hey, Jude. What are you talking about? How is that an example? You know, how is there anything from that I should pick up on about apostasy and apostates, especially in the last days? Well, I'm going to give you the good news first. Probably because I was reminded this morning by Steve Rice that I'm to preach the good news today. As in every week, I try to give you that good news in some fashion or form. You know, the guys I work with, I don't know, I guess I can say this. If it comes back to bite me, I'll just have to get bit. But, you know, from about midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, there's not a whole lot on television. And when you only get 4 channels anyway. So they're watching Judge Judy, Judge Perez, this judge, that judge, and everybody's a judge. And I get to thinking about a courtroom. If you've ever been in a courtroom, courtrooms are intimidating. And I've only been in one really just a couple of times, and once was for someone else, and the other time it was just to dismiss a ticket because I didn't deserve it. There's other things I did that I probably deserved and didn't get, but I didn't deserve that one. So courtrooms are intimidating. I'm going to give you the last look at a courtroom, one that you certainly don't want to be as a participator, but as a spectator. You want to be able to see this. You want to be able to observe it. It's not going to be an easy thing to watch. I can't prove that we're going to necessarily get to make a lot of comments, but the fact of the matter is, there is a courtroom reserved, a day of judgment. It's the day of judgment that Jude spoke of. Well, what does that look like? What's that courtroom look like? Now, I said I'd give you the best news first, so that's what I'm going to do. So, those that went up in the breadth of the earth, in verse 9, in Revelation chapter 20, encompassed the camp of the saints about, in the beloved city. The fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, the small and the great, stand before God, and the books were opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. And death and hell were delivered up, the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. You say, well, what's good about that? This is the good news. This is the good news of the gospel. Jesus Christ came to this earth and died for our sin. That means he died for my sin in particular. He died for your sin in particular. He died for the sins of the world. No one need be in that courtroom. You don't have to be there. You can be a spectator. You can be one of those that's name is written in the Lamb's book of life. You don't have to be there as a participant, because if you are, this is a quick and swift judgment. I'm not so certain that it doesn't happen in the course of one 24-hour day. There will be no rebuttal. There will be no defense. Someone won't be able to say, well, I didn't realize. No one told me. I should have listened. I shouldn't have shook my fist in your face. I should not have believed what they told me. There won't be any need for that, because the judgment is swift. Now, how is that good news for us? Okay. Let me turn the page on my notes, and I won't have to refer back to them. You ready? When I accepted Jesus Christ and that gift of eternal life that he offers to me freely, my name and your name, because of belief that he is the only begotten Son of God, belief that he died on a cross for my sin, belief that when he died and when he was buried, my sins, though they be many, were taken into that grave. And when he rose, then I am justified. It's just as if I'd never sinned. That is the good news of the gospel. And today you can be saved if you're not. If you believe that and you receive that, you can have that hope of eternal salvation. And you'll be there as a spectator, but not as a participant. You know why? Ask me why. Because your case got thrown out of court. It was handled. It was taken care of. I wrote it down exactly like I want to say it. Our case that God had against us was settled out of court. When it comes to me, when it comes to you, when it comes to the saint, when it comes to the saved, the Father won't say, oh yeah, what about that guy? What about Mark Wilt? What about Terry DeWeber? What about that was all settled out of court. Settled out of court. I'm saved and I know it. And my plight has been settled out of court. I don't have to go to that courtroom. I don't have to be a participant of that courtroom because Jesus is my defense attorney and he's never lost a case. That's the good news, isn't it? Yeah. Give the Lord a hand. That's the good news. That is the good news of the gospel. That's the good news. And Jude is simply saying to us back in that verse 6, he's saying there is a day that's reserved for judgment. And in that day of judgment, don't you realize that there are going to be many in attendance of that particular day? And of those that are in attendance, there are going to be those who have been locked in eternal darkness, in the chain of darkness, and they're going to be thrown into that lake of fire. Now, if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what I got to do. So verse number 6 shows me that there are disobedient principalities that God has locked and reserved into utter darkness unto the day of judgment, unto that day that I just read to you. Now, what in the world is a saint doing at that great white throne judgment? I got a feeling that it's not going to be a happy day for any of us. Oh, sure, we'll be kind of glad that, we're not participants. But I have a great fear that there are going to be people that we know, that we knew in this life. Maybe we witnessed to them. All of us have a heritage. I got in the mail this week, and it was right before we learned of Laura's father, her passing. I'll show them to you one day. Some pictures of me. You go, why is that interesting? Because they're in black and white. That lets you know, one of them's in color. Just 1 out of 7's in color. That lets you know when you're in black and white photo, you're old. And I'm just a baby. I'm in the 3rd or 4th grade. I'm in Cub Scouts. There's a picture of me at a Happy Days diner. It was Charlie's Drive-In, and there's a guy behind the counter, and I thought it was my buddy. And as plain as day, it says right there, Mark Wilt. I'm going, wait a minute, that's me. So I get out the magnifying glass, and I'm looking at myself and this picture, this Polaroid, and I'm going, wow, what a good-looking guy. I had a heritage. Everything about that heritage led me to a place. My boss was a believer. My friend was a believer. When I was asked to go to a Bible-believing Baptist church, and I went and I heard the gospel about the 3rd time, I recognized that I was a sinner who had not repented. I was a guy that had on and off attended church his whole life, but I had never received that gift of eternal life. So my best friend outside of my wife on this earth is that guy that I've known since 2nd grade, who is a pastor in Indiana, along with another 6 of us out of one Sunday school class. And hearing of my wife's father's passing, I heard from those guys. And so this crossed in the mail, unbeknownst that my father-in-law was going to pass. So when I got those pictures, yesterday was a day of collecting memories. And so all these photos are flooding in. And so I thought I ought to get in the mix. So I just threw a few of mine in there just to see if anybody'd pick up on it. And you know what I got? Wow! You used to be that young? Wow! You used to work at a drive-in? You used to be, and I think they were laughing, you used to be a Cub Scout? And I could probably still do the Cub Scout code, but I won't. Yeah. We all have a heritage. And my life really began, not just as a result of that man that's standing in that picture with me, but it certainly, he contributed to it. a lot of people contributed to me being saved. My grandmother, when I was a child, she was always telling me I was going to be a preacher. Of course, as a kid, you're just like, yeah, right, yeah, sure. Preach what? And so she passed while I was at Bible college, knowing that I was going to be a preacher. So I say all that to say this. Jude gives us an idea with this example that there is a judgment that is reserved. And this judgment is reserved against a day that you and I, simply because we know him, he that hath the Son hath life, he that hath not the Son hath not life. Because we know him, we're not going to be participators, we'll be spectators. So once again, if you don't know Jesus this morning, this is a day that you can receive Christ and you can receive that gift of eternal life that we sang about in our pre-service. So, verse 6, the angels which kept not their first estate. God has an order of creation. He has creation and he has different categories for creation. There were the angels. They were created. There is man. Man was created. There were the animals, the beasts, the fowls of the air, the fish of the sea. God created. Satan's design, especially in the last days, is to confuse people about the creation. Because if you can confuse them about the creation, then they're confused about the Creator. And if they're confused about the Creator, now then all things have become relative. You go, what does that mean? It means that God's categories don't matter. Now, I didn't think this was going to be related because it came at an odd time in the midst of mourning, and so I kind of dismissed it and said, well, that's nice, but I didn't think much of it. And as I looked at this and I began to develop this a little bit more before this morning, I thought, wait a minute. That is exactly the lie that is being told to our teenagers right now. This new gen, this Z-Gen generation, they're believing a lie. And they're believing a lot of lies. But one of the things, the proponent or the propagation that's being spewed forth from universities, and thank God not any of our local teachers would do this, but it's the idea, and you hear me use this term all the time. You'll hear me say something like, that's non-gender specific. You remember me saying? I say that all the time. When there's a reference to man, and it doesn't just mean male, it means mankind. Male, female, boy, girl, husband, wife, men and women, boys and girls, that kind of thing. Satan's lie in the last days has to do with verse 6. The angels left their estate. They looked at, this is going to get tough. They looked at and they believed the lie that Satan, that Lucifer was propagating. You can be like God. You can be a God. And so a third of the angelic host was cast out of heaven. And so they left their own habitation. Think about the principality and the power and the dominion that the angelic host had. Think about them right now. In the presence of God. Ministering agents. That's who they are. That's what they do. They were dissatisfied with their habitation. They didn't like heaven. And they looked upon the daughters of men. Now, if I'm going to be really honest, and I'm going to try to be brutally honest, I'm going to give you, and it's the toss of a coin. It's a coin flip. You can go either way with this. And then when I'm finished, I'll tell you what I think. But there is the idea that they didn't like, they were dissatisfied with heaven, so they followed Satan, and God kicked them out, and he reserved for them this eternal state in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. There's a cloud, a darkness. Some commentators believe that it's not a literal chain because, see, here's the thing. 1 Peter 5:8 says, the devil is like a roaring lion. He seeks whom he may devour. He roams and he walks to and fro the earth. And there are demons. Not every angel that fell is in a chain, chained up in hell, waiting for that judgment. So which ones are and which ones aren't? I'm going to give you a couple of ideas, and I'll try not to take too long. This might go into 2 weeks. I don't know. As I develop this through the week, I'm thinking this is more than one setting, because I'm trying to give two opinions and two views, and I don't want to confuse them. And at the same time, I'm not going to run from this because it's right in front of me. So what exactly happened? Well, there's a couple things that happened. I want you to look at 2 Peter. Just flip over. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. That parallels what Jude is saying. So, in that context, I have to think that what God is saying is because they believed not God and they disavowed themselves to God for whatever reason. They followed Satan. Maybe they looked at this life and were attracted to it. Maybe they were attracted to the daughters of men. I'm going to explain some things to you, and I'm going to try very hard not to lose you in this conversation. What exactly happened? Well, we know that whether these chains of darkness are literal chains or that the darkness that envelops the angelic host is that it's reserved unto that day of judgment. It might very well just mean that they can't escape it. God's not going to renege on this. Now, God's not going to say, I'm going to give you another chance at that judgment. God's saying that it's as good as done. You're going to abide in darkness forever. It's eternal torment. Now, did that start then? And I'm going to tell you, I've been reading this book for years. And I just come across some things today and this week that I thought, I hadn't seen that before. Where have I been? But here's one spin on this, okay? Some believe, and I mean it's a flip of a coin, many people believe, many scholars believe, that these angels, that there were a certain group of angels that saw the daughters of men and they wanted to procreate. Time out. Wait a minute. What do you mean? Specifically, they wanted to have children with the daughters of men. You remember the giants that we talked about last week? Where did they come from? Where did the giants come from? My brother in the back sitting on the edge of his seat, he loves this kind of stuff. Where did they come from? A lot of people believe that in Genesis chapter 6, you can flip back there if you like, that in Genesis chapter 6, it speaks of the sons of God marrying, taking the daughters of men, and from that union, these giants, their offspring were these giants. And let me read that for you. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters that were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. He's limiting now how long we're going to live. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same become mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Okay, what does that have to do with modern day apostasy and apostates? We're going to have to do a little research. So if you have your Bible, look in Genesis chapter 4. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son. Now you remember, born to Adam and Eve were Cain and Abel. And Cain rose up and slew Abel. Now just read with me, and I'll make the observation. So Adam knew his wife again and bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God said, she had appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Keep reading. This is the book of the generations of Adam. Don't get bored with this, because it reveals something to me. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him, male and female. Created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Seth. I was told at my wedding, and you know, you're at your wedding, you're at the reception, and people come by and they give you advice. You know, honestly, I'm just wanting to get away on the honeymoon. Okay. Eat the cake here. Let's go. Get in the car. So there's this lady. I don't know who. I can't even remember who it was. There's this little lady, and she comes up and she says, "Honey, I'm gonna give you some advice. I'd rather have $50, but okay, give me the advice." She says, "Never go to bed angry." Well, I have since learned and read that that's a pretty good idea. Don't ever go to bed angry. So Laura and I, for all these years, have tried to never go to bed angry. Now, we still have wrestled about some issues, but we've tried to never go to bed angry. This is the first time I've gotten this. For 130 years, Adam and Eve had no other children. You want to talk about going to bed angry? They were either so hurt by the fact that their sons, one of them had committed murder, that Adam and Eve had a schism between them. There was something that was hindering them obeying what God told them to do in the first place. Be fruitful and multiply. For 130 years, and please, it's funny, but it's not, I've got a headache. I don't know if that was Adam, I don't know if that was Eve, but somebody had a headache for 130 years. Talk about not going to bed angry. 130 years later, they got up enough courage to have another child. Never seen that before. Maybe it was just the sheer horror of the fact that one of their sons had killed a brother, and they didn't want to have any more children. I don't know. But after 130 years, guess what? We're pregnant. And we're going to call his name Seth. Now, as I read through this, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness, his likeness, Adam's likeness, and his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. It seems like after Seth, things were okay. And we went back to doing what God had asked them to do to start with. You are from a generation after Seth. So am I. Jesus is after the generation of Seth. So was King David. You say, why is that important? And all the days of Adam were 930 years. Remember, pre-flood. And he died. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begot Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. You go, wow. Why is that so important to the story? Because in the context of that story, there are other men that are born. There are sons and daughters that are born. Somewhere, I believe, in the capacity of that life of Adam and Eve, Satan fell. Now, I know that the serpent came to Eve. So that means that he fell before. Or does it? I believe it does. But I believe that at this point, when men began to call upon the name of the Lord, some of the angelic hosts that had fallen began to look at the daughters of men and thought, I like that. So one spin is that these angels married daughters of men, and they had children. And these children were giants. I know I'm not going to get through. In Matthew chapter number 22, there's a group of people called the Sadducees. They had a real hang-up about the resurrection. So they were trying to catch Jesus in Matthew 22. They said to Jesus, hey, there's this guy, and he has a wife, and he dies, and he's got 6 other brothers. There's 7 of them, 7 sons. So the next brother takes the wife, and he has her to be his wife, and then he dies. And likewise, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. And he dies. And then the wife, she dies. In the resurrection, whose wife is she? And probably one of the more classic statements that we probably could make to an apostate is given. You error in that you don't know the scriptures. They shall neither give or take in marry. They shall be as the angels. Angels do not procreate. I don't know about you, but I'm confused. Angels could take on the form of men. There is the idea that the angelic host that fell, some of them delighted upon the daughters of men, and giants were created. They took upon the habitation of men. In essence, they possessed them. And they were able to procreate. Okay, I can buy that. That makes perfectly good sense. Why is that important? Well, if you're going to follow that reasoning, I'm going to give you some reasons why. I'm going to go another direction next week, so you might as well just get ready for that. If that's true, that we know that Satan, he's not chained up. He's the prince and the power of the air. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12 puts it this way. This is where my Bible is frayed, and I have to be careful. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. 1 Corinthians 15:24. Colossians 2:15. Let's go to Colossians 2:15. There are many verses. These are just some that jumped out at me. Colossians chapter 2 and verse number 15. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made show of them openly, triumphing over them all. Speaking once again of the flesh and blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that were against us. What did I tell you? He settled out of court. He blotted out our sin. He settled out of court. So having forgiven you all trespasses, blotting out our ordinances, which was contrary then to us, he took out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Verse 15, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made show of them openly, triumphing over them all, triumphing over them in it. So not all demons are chained. If Jude is saying that they're literally chained in hell, they're not all chained in hell. If it's a metaphor, if he means that there is a darkness that they will never escape, they are chained and their end is secure. There's a day of judgment waiting. I know demons are real. I've seen a couple, and not in church. Well, one guy could have passed, but. So not every demon is chained, if we take that literally. I didn't think this would relate, but I'm going to close with this. I gave you the best news first, right? I understand that it's possible that an angel could possess, just as a demon can possess, a man and procreate with a woman. From that union were the giants born. If you want to go that way. I don't particularly want to go that way, but I got to let you know anyway. If I do right by you, I got to let you know that's one spin on it, and it's 50-50. I mean, half the people I read after, they believe that happened. The other half don't, and I'm going to let you make your own decision. But the giants were real. They had to come from somewhere, right? Here's the lie. Jude, hey Jude, how in the world will that in any way at all relate to a 21st century believer who waits for Jesus to come back again? Well, you remember back in Genesis, and we were looking at those generations, and the generation of Seth. At that generation of Seth, those sons and daughters, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And so what I saw there is a very subtle lie that's being told right now. If you have a MasterCard, tear it up. I don't have one. I won't ever get one. I saw an ad on television the other day, and it was a transgender person, and they had their MasterCard, and they had this MasterCard without fear of rebuttal or persecution. That just got flipped. We're supposed to feel guilty. MasterCard is catering to transsexuals. We're supposed to feel guilty about that. According to that commercial, they can have a MasterCard and they can go into any store and not have to fear repercussion or fear a disdaining look. You see, I realized something a long time ago. I'm not ever going to win anybody to Christ like that by arguing with them, and probably not by debating them. There are other people that can do that a lot better than I can. What I can do is I can give them Christ. I can give them that good news that I gave to you. Now, what we do after that, well, it's a toss-up. You know, I've got some guys, I asked this question the other day, and they looked at me like a calf looking at a new gate. What do you mean? If you win somebody to the Lord that's transsexual, you're going to have special classes for them? Hey, serious. I said, well, I hope to win a few. I led a black guy to the Lord, 6 months ago? I don't know. Time just... Phew. Why can't I lead a transsexual to the Lord? I'll tell you what I won't do is I won't sit and argue with them. I read something the other day on Facebook. Here's what they're teaching this generation. They're teaching a generation of youth, children, to be non-binary. What does that mean? Well, I had to look it up. Binary is the summation of your parts. It's two or more parts. You are identified by your parts. And God said, male and female created he them. You remember what I told you when we were looking at a society that God turns his back on? They confused creation. They don't acknowledge the Creator. And the next thing that you know is everything is relative. And I read, I won't tell you where and how, but I read, and I thought, oh my, non-binary? I am more than the summation of my parts. You know why I agree with that part? There's a soul inside of you. There's a soul inside of me. There's more to me than the summation of my parts. But to think that you're going to go through life being non-gender specific, I have a word for that. And it's idios or ideas. Means idiot. You're an idiot. And girls, listen to me. I'm not trying to be what's the word? Risque or filth. No. But I can fix this real quick. Go into the bathroom, disrobe, and I'll tell you what you are. But there's a generation who are believing this junk. I'm non-binary. I'm to be respected because not of my parts. I'm neither male nor female. I'm neither him or shim. I'm not he or her. I am me. And that lie has been propagated to cover up or make an excuse for sin. That's all that does. And Jude, though he may not have been thinking about that, was saying, if this is true, that the angelic host were persuaded because of the daughters of men to leave heaven and follow Satan, and now they want to have a union with the daughters of men, God says there is reserved in darkness chains, and one day they will have a judgment that waits them, and they can't escape it. So, back to the good news. You don't have to live like that. You know, my granddaughters and my grandson, they have to watch that stuff. And we sit there and we have to explain that stuff. And if we don't explain it, it's on us. And when that came on, I had to explain that. When good becomes bad and right becomes wrong, when there are those that are so confused that they don't know what they are, or that their merit is not in their genital parts, I'm going to just simply say one thing. Idios. Idios. You're an idiot. But I won't say that with respect to salvation. That's not how I'll win them. By debating with them all day long, that's not going to win them. I think that's why Paul said, I don't know anything except Jesus Christ and him crucified. You go, what are you going to do after you lead one of them to the Lord? I don't know. I don't know yet. You know, only because we have medical technology that does that kind of surgery, would any man in his right mind want to be a woman? No. Would any woman in her right mind want to be a man? No. So we've got a generation out there that are believing this junk. What's the end game? The end game is possession. Satan's going to take as many as he can with him. And he's perpetrating a pretty good lie, if a lie can be good. There are people that are buying into that junk. And I'm supposed to preach the gospel, and I will. And if one came in the back and sat down, I'd preach the gospel to them, and I'd love them by the grace of God, and I'd preach salvation by grace through faith, and I'd pray to God that they would receive Christ, and we'll talk about sexual gender later. So, I'm going to leave you hanging. There's another approach, and it's the one I'm going to take. I'm not 100% convinced that angels possessed anybody. I think there's another way to look at it. So I'll give that to you next week. Lord, I pray that this morning you take the words of God, that you take your word, that it'll not return void. It will accomplish a purpose wherein you send it. Lord, there's not an ounce of hatred in my heart or in my mind toward these people, toward anyone that would claim such lunacy, but I feel sorry for them that they've been deceived. And I pray that as a preacher of the gospel that I can point them to the cross and help us as believers to be able to point people back to the cross. And the cross and the truth, that sets us free from the chains of darkness that have enveloped a generation that would believe this nonsense. And help me to preach the cross like never before. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. You know what that does, by the way? I told you I was going to get in trouble or I was going to get it right. That means there are no spirit children running around, Mormon. They neither give nor do they marry. They are as the angels. So the spirit children of Joseph Smith, what a lie. What a lie. Jesus had a way. Maybe it had something to do about the fact that he's the Word incarnate, but he had a way with people. And I like his non-apologetic approach, yet I don't know that he was unkind. He just simply said, you do error in that you don't know the Scriptures. So I found something out about angels real quick in Matthew chapter 22 and verse 30. They can't procreate. Now, you got a whole week to think about that. So next week, when we hit verse 6 and go into verse 7, you should be able to, hey, Jude me right into the second coming. Yeah. Because I've either confused you or I've made it now clear as mud. I'm not sure which.